Welcome back to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Bull. This segment is brought to you by CommercialAgentSuccess.com. If you are a real estate agent, you do not want to miss this site, CommercialAgentSuccess.com. Today we're talking about emerging trends in real estate 2018. This is an incredible report put out by ULI and PwC. And we have Mitch Roschelle and Andy Warren here with us from PwC in Studio One. And we've talked about a lot of the trends, a lot of things you guys are seeing moving forward for 2018, but we want to know what to do with this information, right? How can we make some money or maybe avoid some mistakes, right? So what are some best bets for moving forward from your emerging trends report?
I'll start with the first. Well, it's the evolution of the demand for housing, right? So we talked about it a little bit in the previous segment. The fact of the matter is affordability remains the biggest concern in housing. So how do we create more affordable housing? And you can either push it further away where the land is cheaper, or you can make the thing smaller. And one of the things that's interesting is the advent of technology with 3D printing. We're seeing a trend globally of making units smaller and smaller, a lot of prefab construction. So you have to figure out the demand is there, there's a price point concern, so how do you evolve the housing stock to meet the demands of people with a limited appetite for stretching their budget?
So some opportunities maybe in kind of manufacturing this housing and bringing it on site and assembling it there, maybe tiny houses, maybe these micro apartments, right?
Yeah.
We actually, and that kind of touches on something we've talked about in past years, is the shortage of construction labor, which is only going to be intensified this year with all the natural disasters and the construction labor that's going to be required to rebuild those. You start building houses in a controlled environment, suddenly, we talked about some of the baby boomers retiring, suddenly that guy who's a construction guy who's 58 to 62, maybe he stays on the job. So it kind of answers two questions and kind of helping move that forward. But it's a little bit of a Rubik's Cube to figure out how to bring the right housing to the market at the right price. And whoever figures that out is going to be a big winner.
Yeah. Well, what about in retail? There's a lot of flux in retail, a lot of change going on. Are there some opportunities there? Any best bets?
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, which is standing around and kicking the can down the road with a woe is me attitude that retail's dying isn't the right answer. And trying to figure out who's out there, what works in a different market, and how to potentially bring that to your market. So that's if you're a broker, how do you figure out what's working, in landlord-tenant relations in other markets? If you're a landlord, sort of going out and finding that tenant. And sometimes, so you'll take, what's interesting is we have an aging population. And one thing I know, my dad's going to be 92 a little after this show airs, and the fact of the matter is, I think he goes to the doctor every day for something, right? Where doctors used to be in office buildings. So what do? You move them closer where the people are, and what do? You have a lot of vacancy in retail. Urgent care centers, that is popping up all over the place in suburbia. So it's those kinds of uses that you see them working in one market, you bring them to another market. Retail's in the right place. Retail was put, for the most part, it was put in place. The fact of the matter is there just aren't enough retailers, so you have to find non-retailers to consume that space. And I think it works if you just figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It's good real estate location-wise. It's got good visibility.
It has parking. It has
close to the people.
Close to the people. It has signals, intersections.
Yeah.
It's got all those things that were required by law, by code, by statute in the past. It's just that people don't need another store that sells X. So what do you put in that box?
And retail's always been a very localized business. It's going to become even more so. And one of the big opportunities is continues to be urban neighborhood revitalization, neighborhoods that are gentrifying. Finding the right retail and getting in there on the ground floor is something that a lot of retailers and people that we talked about in the market are thinking about, is how do I get there? But it's not an easy, we can take this playbook and go, okay, this works everywhere. It's very hands-on, very granular in finding the right solution for that market.
And if people continue to buy goods digitally, and they need to get them. The question is, what role does traditional stick and brick retail play in being a delivery center for online purchases of goods? The other thing is on the service side of retail, and people sort of forget this, but if you're close to it, you don't forget it. Banks are getting out of the branch business in a big way because their customer base has shifted to being a digital experience. You can deposit checks on your smartphone. So one other thing that's pulling away from the demand for retail neighborhood locations is the fact that banks are having a much smaller footprint.
Yeah. What about best bets related to industrial or office? You talked about earlier the office kind of sector changing, and maybe there needs to be more CapEx spent in these buildings. Where's some opportunities there?
Really kind of the one that's really kind of emerging, or not emerging, re-emerging, is people are looking at the suburban office again. And that all kind of, we talked about how things kind of tie together in this year's report and the themes, and that's, you know, millennials getting older, starting families, looking back at the suburbs. And suburban office owners are starting to look at, how do I have an urban feel to my suburban office? And there's more movement towards that, whether it's taking an entire campus and virtually creating a little urban city out of it, or just 2 or 3 owners getting together and creating those amenities to go with that park. And that's catching on very well, and I think that's probably where we may see more of that in coming years. This is a little bit of a teaser, so if it's a best bet to get in early, that was where that would be.
Are some of the millennials going to move to suburbia? Yeah. And maybe
help they are moving to suburbia. The problem is they can't buy the house that they may want because it's either priced too high or it's not for sale. Yeah. It's not for sale because the empty nesters that are in it can't sell it because they need a certain price and the market won't clear at that price, or the thing that they want to buy, if they sell that, they can't afford. So affordability is sort of becoming a little bit of an awful cycle. The other demand driver for suburban office that it's worth noting from a best bet perspective is, again, more medical office opportunities. So there are, when you think medical office, you think of medical office where the whole building is medical office. But if you look in suburbia, more and more buildings are sort of being taken over by doctors and practices, and the one-stop shop model is the answer there. If you go to a doctor and they refer you to get some sort of a test, you don't want to have to get in your car and drive someplace else for the test. You want to be able to literally walk down the hall and do it, and have some sort of a concierge there to help direct you from physician's office to lab and then back to physician's office. And they're taking over, big health practices are becoming more and more of a mega trend, and they're taking over traditional suburban office buildings and making those their homes. So you're going to see that across the country, I think.
And industrial is last mile. It's an easy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still the holy grail.
Yeah, and one of the things that Andy and I realized in the taxi coming over here, because our research is last minute here, not only last mile,
last minute,
is how much industrial is being put in New York City. Right. So why? It's all last mile. The biggest consumption magnet for online retail is New York City, and New York City has never been a place where you traditionally had industrial. And so what happens? You take a big office building in New York that has 5 stories below sea level of space. That used to be where file cabinets were for records retention. You don't need that space anymore. A lot of that space is being repurposed, and they're making that warehousing in the city for pickup and delivery. So you're going to see more and more industrial, maybe vertical industrial and not horizontal industrial.
What about best bets for retail, back to retail for a moment, for last mile? Or might we see some of these retail properties get used as last mile distribution?
Yeah.
That's another area that's being highly looked at. Mitch mentioned medical. You look at how many drugstores do you need on every corner? They're in a perfect location. I think it's almost a regulatory question. Can you get permission from the city to put in last mile distribution from some of those sites? Yeah. And people are looking at it. It's just maybe a little bit more in the early stages, and it's almost with the housing, you've got to convince the zoning commissions that this is okay, and the planning and zoning that it's all right to put this here and have this here.
And one of the realities is all of the products that are sold digitally are all part of the big data universe. So big online retailers, whether they be the big names in that industry or folks that are selling most of their goods digital only, they know when stuff gets bought, they know how it gets bought, they know who's buying it. And if the hot item, in the holiday season is a 60-inch flat screen TV, that's always a big Black Friday, doorbuster kind of thing. They'll just ship them before they're even purchased to those locales because they know with great certainty how many units are probably going to get sold. So the question is, how do you do that? Well, the reality is the logistical and data side of it is something that these retailers know better than anything. So I think there's a solution to a lot of this in big data, but we said it, there's a lot of things in emerging trends that we're proud of. You heard it here first. We talked about last mile probably about 3 years ago. And it remains the biggest challenge because you buy something online. Yesterday I needed 2 cigarette lighter adapters for the car for USB because there was a pile of them in one of my son's cars and they didn't work and I went nuts. So the fact of the matter is I ordered them. I just got a notice they're being delivered today. I ordered them yesterday.
Nice.
Like, how is that possible?
So best bets. So from your interviews and your studies, are there any best bets for investment as far as type of property, sector, or maybe a class of property? I mean, you talked about healthcare. Are there the sectors that kind of look promising for the future?
I would say one to look at is senior housing. So I'd put 2 on that list. One is what Andy said before, it's worth re-emphasizing. Reinvest in the existing building as an investment opportunity as opposed to necessarily buying a new building because you may be able to generate a lot more return per dollar in just reinvesting in the existing property. And the other is senior housing. Don't think of it as an age-in-place assisted living to a congregate care and acute care. Think of it more as creating opportunities for baby boomers to live someplace in more of a live, work, play environment. When we thought about live, work, play, we were thinking about millennials. I'm looking at James over there who doesn't get any camera time. Maybe spin that camera around, James. But the fact of the matter is we thought about live, work, play as a millennial thing. That's what was important to them. We said a few segments ago that the workforce participation rate for 65 to 74 is the highest it's ever been. So they're still working, but where do they live and where do they play? And if you create some community feel, and it may just be taking existing stock and repositioning it, taking parts of cities and repositioning them, there's an interesting play there. So stop thinking of it as seniors, thinking of it as more, let's just take senior out of the equation and talk about it as baby boomer housing.
Right. What about multifamily? What's the sentiment of your interviewees in your report on multifamily, and are there some best bets there?
Currently, the one thing I'll give you a warning, the people are watching, is we've maybe...
But then the lower third, warning.
Maybe we've commoditized the uniqueness of downtown urban housing. So there's so much of that coming up now. So people are watching how that all gets absorbed. But actually, affordable multifamily housing, very attractive. People are looking at it.
But a lowercase a, so it's not something that there's government financing coming from. Right? This is stuff that people can get into. Right.
Because there's a belief that the shift to a lower home ownership percentage in the U.S. is here to stay. Part of it's generational, part of it's choice, part of it's concern over the fact that maybe housing doesn't go up and don't want to go through that downturn again. So that's really, I think, if I had to pick a best bet, people are still looking at that. Go out, find that property that you don't need to do a lot to, a B- property that you can upgrade to a B, and just take the rents from that, and then maybe down the road you take it to an A if it's in a good location. Maybe you don't, because there's going to continue to be a demand for that property going forward.
And price, value, affordability, however you want to phrase it, is going to be the decision making. The fulcrum of the decision is going to be around that. So people may be willing to sacrifice certain quality elements just for affordability.
Well, that makes sense. And one thing you want to think about when you're investing is Location,
Very
right?
much.
And I like how you guys, you do the research and then you ask the participants, what they think. So we're going to take a short break. When we get back, we're going to talk about the top cities where you want to invest, whether you're a lender, maybe you're an investor through crowdfunding, maybe you're a developer. Stay with us. I'm Michael Bull. This is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.